I was sitting in a small, hushed cafe in a quiet corner of Tokyo last week, the kind of place where even the clink of a ceramic spoon against a saucer feels like a minor disturbance of the peace. The television in the corner, usually tuned to a flickering loop of weather reports and mindless variety shows, suddenly flashed a breaking news alert. A senior government official had just suggested, with a chillingly calm delivery, that Japan should finally explore its nuclear options. Now, in Washington or London, a comment like that triggers a policy debate. But in that room, the reaction was different. The air didn't just go cold. It felt as though someone had walked into a cathedral and started screaming profanities during a prayer. The salaryman at the table next to me didn't look frightened of a foreign missile. He looked deeply, viscerally ashamed. He stared into his coffee, his jaw tightening, as if the official hadn't just proposed a weapon, but had personally shattered a sacred, unspoken vow. It was a perfect window into what makes this society tick. For decades, Japan has been curated like a delicate ecosystem, an exquisite piece, held together not by police, but by the invisible architecture of meiwaku, the absolute virtue of not causing trouble for others. The three non-nuclear principles aren't just laws, they are the foundational protocol of a high-trust civilization that has traded raw power for a hermetic, predictable order. To even mention the bomb is to commit a form of social suicide. It is the honey, the raw, unsanctioned truth erupting through the tatame, the polite mask that allows this Galapagos nation to function. That momentary silence in the cafe revealed the true tension of modern Japan. A civilization that would rather choose a graceful decline through automation and social engineering than pick up the blunt, violent instruments of the Western realist playbook. It makes you wonder, in a world of rising chaos, can a civilization fortress survive by simply refusing to speak the language of force? Or is the sacred silence finally reaching its breaking point?
That silence, that feeling of a sacred vow being shattered, that is exactly the tension we're going to dive into.
It's this incredible friction between a deeply held cultural identity and the shifting realities of the world around it.
Precisely. Our mission today is to really get under the hood of how this civilization fortress operates. We're looking at a nation that is trying desperately to maintain its foundational societal architecture.
This exquisite piece you described.
Exactly, this high-trust system. And it's doing this while navigating these really severe external security shifts, and at the same time, this overwhelming internal challenge of demographic collapse.
So we're going to examine Japan's nuclear restraint, the credibility of its alliance with the U.S., which is so key to all of this, and then get into the surprising way its demographic crisis is actually driving global technological leadership.
Right. This whole deep dive is about the strategic refusal of the blunt instrument, whether that instrument is a nuclear weapon or whether it's mass immigration, and the incredibly complex, nuanced solutions that refusal demands.
Okay, let's start with that taboo. It's so massive. For you listening, it might seem completely counterintuitive. You've got this technologically advanced, wealthy state like Japan, and it's right next door to a nuclear North Korea and a rapidly modernizing China.
And it hasn't pursued its own deterrent.
It hasn't, and that's not an accident. It's a foundational strategic choice, so we need to understand the architecture of it.
Yeah.
What are the pillars, the consistent factors that have sustained this decision for decades?
Well, there are really three. And they form this kind of mutually reinforcing structure. You have culture meeting hard strategy. The first factor, and this is the one that often gets overlooked in purely realist discussions, is national identity.
This goes back to that feeling of shame in the cafe.
It does. Japan consciously, deliberately crafted a post-war identity as a peace state. It's grounded in pacifism, in anti-militarism. And the key thing to understand is that foregoing nuclear weapons isn't seen internally as just weak acquiescence to American protection.
It's seen as a strength.
It's perceived as enhancing national security. It establishes a kind of moral authority, and critically, it reduces regional anxieties. Anxieties that could destabilize the very trading environment that Japan absolutely depends on. It's part of this non-nuclear social contract, which is just crucial for maintaining their high-trust society and that foundational protocol of meiwaku.
Not causing trouble. It's an intensely cultural, intensely moral statement, and of course it's reinforced by their unique history as the only country to have ever suffered atomic attacks. So if that's the cultural driver, what's the more formal normative one?
That's the second pillar, a really strong global commitment to non-proliferation norms. This is what elevates their moral standing on the world stage. Japan is completely dedicated to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. They ratified it back in 1976.
But lots of countries ratify treaties. What makes Japan's commitment different?
It's the activism. Their commitment goes way beyond just signing a piece of paper. Japan was the very first non-nuclear weapon state to sign the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the CTBT. And their diplomacy is remarkably active on this front. They consistently introduce UN resolutions pushing for disarmament.
I remember they even froze aid to certain countries, didn't they?
They did. They've actively frozen grant aid to countries that conduct nuclear tests. This commitment ensures that Japan acts as a global stakeholder in non-proliferation. It makes their policy a cornerstone of international diplomacy, not just some local idiosyncratic choice.
So we have the emotional, cultural identity, and we have the normative global commitment. The third factor has to be the cold, hard math. The realist calculation that decided this whole thing was strategically sound in the first place.
Right. And that's the third pillar, realist security calculations. For decades, the consistent, sober judgment from Tokyo has been that self-nuclearization would be, strategically disastrous.
Why disastrous? A lot of strategists would say the opposite.
You have to remember the geography. Japan is a relatively small island nation with intensely concentrated population centers. Think about Tokyo, Osaka. They concluded that acquiring their own nuclear weapons would instantly promote regional instability.
An arms race.
A terrifying arms race with China, with Russia. And it would fundamentally undermine Japan's prosperity as a trading nation by making it a frontline target. So the risk calculation was always, is nuclear autonomy worth sacrificing global economic predictability? Is it worth incurring the existential threat of being a primary target?
And the answer was always no.
A resounding no.
Yeah.
Therefore, relying on the robust U.S. extended deterrence was judged to be the far superior strategic choice. So you have this combination, culture, norms, and strategy, and that's what has made the non-nuclear policy so incredibly durable for so long.
But things are changing. External factors, the acceleration of North Korea's nuclear program, China's military modernization, they're forcing a crack in this foundation. And here's where it gets really interesting for me, because despite this immense social taboo, despite all these political principles, there's a constitutional gap, a loophole that allows this debate to even exist.
Exactly.
We all know the three non-nuclear principles: not possessing, not producing, not permitting their introduction, but you're saying those are just policy, not absolute law.
Precisely. Those principles are official government policy. They're endorsed by resolutions in the Diet. They're supported by laws like the Atomic Energy Basic Law. So they are politically and culturally binding. Very binding.
But not legally absolute.
Not constitutionally absolute. We have to look at the foundation, which is the post-war Constitution. Article 9, the famous Peace Clause, renounces war and the maintenance of land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential.
So the loophole is in how you interpret war potential.
Exactly. And to understand this, you have to go all the way back to 1957. The interpretation was laid out by Prime Minister Kishinebusuke, who, not coincidentally, was instrumental in negotiating the revised security treaty a few years later.
What did he say?
Kishi and his cabinet established the doctrine that the Constitution permits the possession of nuclear weapons if they are deemed minimally necessary for self-defense.
Minimally necessary. That's a very flexible phrase.
Incredibly flexible, and that language has been repeatedly reaffirmed by subsequent cabinets over the decades. This doctrine survived because it performed a very neat political trick. It reassured the pacifist public that the policy was firmly non-nuclear, while at the same time placating the security establishment that the legal right to self-defense, even with nuclear means, was still there. It was held in reserve, just in case the security environment became truly, apocalyptic.
Wow, that is a critical nuance. It means the core decision is political, not legal. They wouldn't need a constitutional amendment, which would be basically impossible to pass to change the policy.
All they'd need is to declare that the threat environment has now reached that threshold of minimally necessary.
This is where that raw, unsanctioned truth starts to erupt in policy circles. So what are the actual viewpoints emerging now? What are the options on the table?
They really break down into three contending options, and they reflect that tension between the cultural preference for order and this rising realist anxiety.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, you have option A, move toward a nuclear option. This is the viewpoint advocated by the hardline realists. You find them in certain factions of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP. People like the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe were proponents of at least discussing this.
And what's their argument?
They worry. They worry deeply about the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence. They see things like the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and it makes them nervous. They point to China's expanding naval capabilities, particularly around the Senkaku-Diaoyu Islands, and they argue that Japan simply needs its own deterrent to ensure its strategic independence.
But are they calling for building a bomb tomorrow?
Not necessarily. And this is a key point. Some advocates don't even call for immediate nuclearization. They talk about a nuclear sharing arrangement, like some NATO countries have. Or, even more subtly, they just want to consider the option publicly. The very act of having the discussion, they argue, acts as leverage.
Leverage over the U.S. to keep them committed.
And as a signal to rivals that Japan is, in fact, prepared to break the taboo if pushed too far.
So even just talking about the bomb becomes a tool of statecraft. That is the Western realist playbook in a nutshell. Okay, so what's the second option? The one that's probably the most likely course?
That would be option B. Robust conventional defense and a stronger U.S. alliance. This is the mainstream pragmatic course. It's where the government is currently focused.
And the logic here?
This school argues that nuclearization is just inherently destabilizing. It would trigger that arms race we talked about. And in that race, Japan, being geographically small and dense, is at a massive disadvantage. I mean, one nuclear strike on Tokyo or Osaka. It's an existential catastrophe in a way it might not be for a larger, more dispersed country.
So what's the alternative?
The most probable path is to double down on the alliance. Tighten the U.S. relationship even further. Accelerate their own indigenous conventional capabilities like acquiring long-range strike missiles, and massively enhance their missile defense programs.
So it's a non-nuclear realist response. Deterrence through denial, not just the threat of massive retaliation.
Exactly. They're hoping to build a shield so strong that an attack is just not worth attempting.
And the third option, this must be the one that goes back to that cultural authority, the assertive moral path.
It is. Option C, assertive non-nuclear diplomacy. This group is generally aligned with opposition parties, with civic pacifist groups. They argue that Japan should stick absolutely firmly to its non-nuclear stance.
Their argument being that its moral authority is its greatest strategic asset.
Precisely. They believe that status, as the only victim of atomic attacks, gives them a unique voice. And they argue Japan should use that authority to aggressively push the entire international community, including the U.S., toward faster disarmament and universal CTBT ratification.
So they're taking a principled stand.
A very principled stand. They often criticize both the U.S. and China, actually. They argue that the hypocrisy of established nuclear powers, letting countries like India into the club, that's what motivated states like North Korea to go for the bomb in the first place. Their strategy is a non-military moral route to security.
So you can see the tension laid bare. The whole security debate is framed by this cultural preference for order and peace, the Tate-May, which is now being challenged by this raw, realist anxiety, the hunning. But it seems like no matter which path they choose, the central variable, the linchpin, is the same.
It is. The credibility of the U.S. alliance and its nuclear umbrella. And if you connect that choice back to the bigger picture, the entire Japanese security structure is defined by the resilience of one single strategic concept: extended deterrence.
Okay, let's break that down in detail. What exactly is extended deterrence, and why is the U.S.-Japan relationship kind of the ultimate test case for whether it works?
Extended deterrence is, at its core, the promise to defend an ally with your own nuclear arsenal, even though that ally's territory is geographically distant from your own. And it has two interlocking functions: deterrence and assurance.
Right. Deterrence is for your enemies. Assurance is for your friends.
Exactly. Deterrence is aimed at rivals. It's about convincing Beijing or Pyongyang that the costs of attacking Japan would just far, far outweigh any potential benefits. And you do that by threatening a punishing, potentially nuclear response from the United States.
And assurance.
Assurance is aimed inward, at your allies, in this case, Japan. It's about convincing Tokyo that the U.S. is truly, genuinely willing to follow through on that threat, even if it means risking retaliation against the American homeland.
This is the classic credibility problem. The whole goal, as you see it in strategic documents, is to make Japan an effective Japanese California in the eyes of rivals.
An attack on Okinawa is an attack on California.
But does anyone really believe that a U.S. president would risk San Francisco for the sake of Kyoto? That's the inherent dilemma, isn't it?
That is the core dilemma. And it's precisely why we have to trace how this commitment evolved. It wasn't born fully formed. It went from a vague promise to this meticulously detailed operational mechanism.
So let's start at the beginning. The 1952 Security Treaty. What did that look like?
It was. Well, it was extremely weak by today's standards. It was signed during the occupation, and it functioned more like a base leasing agreement. The U.S. was allowed to station its forces in Japan, but the treaty assumed no firm obligation of defense.
What was the exact language?
It stated the U.S. could respond to an attack against Japan only as it deems necessary.
As it deems necessary. That's a lot of wiggle room.
A huge amount. It was completely provisional. It really reflected a period where U.S. priorities were still focused on just managing the immediate post-war instability. It was more of a unilateral privilege for the U.S. than a mutual alliance.
So when did that change? When did it solidify into a genuine mutual obligation?
That great leap forward happened in 1960 with the revised Treaty of Mutual Cooperation and Security. This revision was, and I don't think this is an overstatement, revolutionary.
What made it so different?
Article V. Article V established a strong mutual obligation. For the first time, both parties recognized that an armed attack against Japan would be dangerous to its own peace and safety, and critically, the U.S. would act to meet the common danger.
Would act, not may act or could act.
Would act. That's the moment the U.S. elevated the defense of Japan from a unilateral option to a bilateral obligation.
Yeah.
It went further. Article 3 mandated mutual effort to build up defense capacity. It was a move away from the old passive sword and shield model, where Japan was just the vulnerable shield.
It moved them towards genuine mutual preparation, shared responsibility.
That's it. That transition from we may respond to we would act is the moment the nuclear umbrella acquired its legal backbone. But, legal language on paper is one thing. You have to translate that into credible, actionable policy.
How did they do that? How did they operationalize it?
They did it through the defense guidelines. The first set came out in 1978, and then they were fundamentally revised in 1997. These guidelines are the nuts and bolts. They solidified credibility by detailing operational cooperation, joint planning, logistics, all the unglamorous stuff that makes a joint defense actually work.
And the 1978 version, what was its focus?
That one was very strictly focused on the defense of the Japanese homeland in case of a direct armed attack. It established the necessary cooperation in things like intelligence sharing and logistics. Pretty straightforward.
But the world changed a lot between 1970 and 1997. The Cold War ended, new regional tensions were rising. How did the 1997 revision adapt?
The 97 revision was a huge expansion of scope. It moved beyond just the immediate defense of Japan. It allowed for joint planning for situations in areas surrounding Japan that might threaten its peace and security.
So that means they could start planning for contingencies.
On the Korean Peninsula or in the Taiwan Strait, exactly. It transformed the alliance from a purely reactive defense packed into a proactive mechanism for managing regional security. And this comprehensive planning, it does two things. It shows rivals that the commitment is real and embedded in joint procedures.
And it assures Tokyo. It shows them that it would be incredibly costly, politically and operationally, for Washington to ever back down.
Precisely.
Okay, but let's address the elephant in the room, the nuclear part itself. The U.S. is publicly committed to pursuing nuclear disarmament. How can it maintain nuclear assurance for Japan while at the same time pursuing a reduced role for its own nuclear arsenal? That seems like a fundamental contradiction.
It is the critical assurance dilemma. And the U.S. addresses it by increasing clarity as its arsenal size decreases. While the U.S. is committed to pursuing a nuclear-free world, official policy documents, things like the Nuclear Posture Review, are very, very specific in their assurances. The foundational pledge is that as long as nuclear weapons exist, the U.S. will maintain safe, secure, and effective nuclear forces.
And is the language explicit about defending allies?
Oh, absolutely. The report on nuclear employment strategy explicitly confirms that the fundamental role of U.S. nuclear weapons remains to deter nuclear attack on the U.S. and its allies and partners. It confirms the U.S. is willing to use nuclear weapons to defend its allies in extreme circumstances. This language is designed to directly counter the narrative that nuclear reductions mean the umbrella has somehow withered.
But if the U.S. is relying more on conventional deterrence, doesn't that raise the nuclear threshold so high that an adversary might think they can get away with a limited conventional attack?
Yeah.
That they can test the U.S. commitment without triggering a nuclear response?
That is the core fear. In strategic circles, it's called decoupling. It's the anxiety that when push really comes to shove, a U.S. president might hesitate to use nuclear weapons to defend Japan for fear of a retaliatory nuclear strike against the American homeland.
So how do you solve that?
To counter this, the U.S. relies on what they call the supplementation strategy. They stress that advanced conventional capabilities, especially ballistic missile defense, or BMD, will supplement the reduced role of nuclear weapons.
How does missile defense specifically solve the decoupling fear? It seems like a technical solution to a psychological problem.
It is. BMD systems, like the Aegis destroyers that both the U.S. and Japan operate, and the ground-based interceptors, are designed to neutralize intermediate-range missiles. By protecting the U.S. homeland and the U.S. forces stationed in Japan from a missile attack, BMD significantly lowers the adversary's incentive to launch a nuclear first strike.
Because their first strike might not even land.
Exactly. It strengthens deterrence by denial. It means the U.S. can more credibly promise to defend Japan because it has a better chance of avoiding a catastrophic retaliatory strike. So it maintains the credibility of the deterrent, all while supporting the long-term goal of disarmament. It's a technological, structural solution to a geopolitical confidence problem.
That is a fascinating application of technology to solve what is essentially a trust issue. Let's use the Senkaku Ryoyu Islands case to see how this works in practice. This shows just how detailed and legally precise the commitment is.
It's a perfect illustration of the meticulous engineering of this treaty. The U.S. commitment regarding those islands relies entirely on the precise wording of the 1960 treaty. When President Obama clarified that the islands fall under Article V, he did so because the treaty language covers territories under the administration of Japan.
Under the administration of Japan. Not territories whose sovereignty is undisputed.
A crucial distinction. This detail is paramount. The U.S. is committed to defending the islands against armed attack because Japan administers them. This is completely separate from the U.S. official position on the underlying question of sovereignty on which they remain neutral.
So it's the administrative status quo that's protected.
That is the legal line in the sand. If that line is crossed by an armed adversary, the U.S. is committed to defense. So you see, the security umbrella isn't some vague promise. It's not a political gesture. It's a meticulously engineered legal, operational, and technological mechanism. And it's the central tiller that allows Japan to maintain its non-nuclear principles while ensuring its stability in a very, very volatile region.
So we've established that Japan strategically refuses the blunt instrument of nuclear force to preserve its cultural order. Now let's pivot to the other strategic refusal. The refusal of the blunt instrument of mass immigration to solve this monumental internal challenge, demographic collapse. And this refusal is forcing Japan down a radical technology-driven path.
This is where that civilization fortress strategy becomes most apparent. Just as the nation chooses predictable security through a sophisticated alliance rather than raw power, it's choosing a predictable social order through technology and engineering rather than the uncontrolled social change that comes with mass immigration.
And the internal challenges are, well, they're existential. So lay out the demographic landscape for us. The numbers I've seen are just staggering.
They are extreme. They far exceed anything in any other advanced economy. Japan's rapid aging and population shrinkage aren't some abstract fear for the future. They are the immediate operating reality. Between 2015 and 2021 alone, the country lost over 1.5 million people.
1.5 million.
And that scale has produced these intense present-day societal changes. For example, nearly half, 49.4% of all Japanese households have at least one member over the age of 65.
Almost half of all households.
And looking forward, by 2040, the number of older adults living alone is projected to reach roughly 9 million people. To put that in perspective, that is the entire current population of a country like Austria.
That's not a marginal shift. That is a fundamental restructuring of society itself. And you've mentioned before that on top of this, there's the cognitive impairment challenge, which demands these urgent technological fixes.
That's right. The projected rate of dementia is a massive public health crisis, and it's a core driver of innovation. By 2030, studies project that somewhere between 20 and 22% of the population over 65 will suffer from dementia.
1 in 5.
About 1 in 5 older adults. That's around 7 million people. This necessitates a rapid, technology-driven redesign of the entire societal infrastructure, elder care, urban mobility, even just the simple provision of nutrition. Because the human workforce to handle this crisis is simply vanishing.
The labor shortages are acute, they're inescapable, especially in these crucial service sectors. What are some of the most startling examples of this labor collapse?
The crisis is everywhere. In primary and tertiary industries, you see the average age of farmers is now 68.4.
60.
Average age of a taxi driver is 60.7. Commercial truck drivers, 48.6. And they're working these long, grueling hours that the shrinking younger population simply refuses to take on. And in regional transportation, the crisis is so severe that for some rural bus routes, the only long-term solution on the table is full automation.
Because there's no one left to drive the bus.
Literally no one. There are no qualified or willing human drivers left. And this necessity, this demographic void, coupled with the social refusal of mass immigration, is what's creating this unique technological trajectory. And it's defined by two key paradigms.
Okay, let's discuss those, automation and augmentation. How does Japan's view of artificial intelligence differ from the often fearful Western perspective?
In Japan, AI is largely focused on the automation paradigm, but it's seen as a saving grace, not a job killer. Automation is a necessity to fill labor shortages where the supply of people has already collapsed. This includes things like fully autonomous driverless buses on set routes, automated warehouse logistics, sophisticated inspection robotics. These are technologies designed to work in the absence of humans because the work simply cannot be done otherwise.
And the second paradigm, augmentation, is about making the remaining workforce, who are often aging, more capable and more durable.
That's augmentation, IA, or intelligence augmentation. This is technology that is intensely focused on enhancing the abilities of the remaining workers, especially older ones. The goal is to embed the necessary skill or the physical strength directly into the machine or even into the worker's clothing. This allows low-skilled or physically aging workers to perform specialized, high-skill, or physically demanding tasks they just couldn't manage on their own.
It's a form of industrial self-help.
It is, and it's often directly supported by government policy.
Okay, so let's get into that policy driver. What's the government initiative that's explicitly directing and funding this shift, particularly in a sector like infrastructure?
That would be the I-Construction Initiative. This is a government-led policy launched primarily by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. I-Construction mandates the use of information and communication technology, or ICT, in every single phase of public construction and infrastructure work.
So it's essentially subsidizing and standardizing the use of smart augmented machinery.
Exactly. And its goal is explicit, to increase productivity by 50% while dealing with a shrinking, aging workforce.
Which brings us to some fascinating case studies, starting with construction. How did a company like Komatsu respond to this I-Construction mandate?
Komatsu, one of the leading heavy equipment manufacturers, responded directly. They introduced these ICT-enabled excavators and bulldozers that have just revolutionized worker augmentation. Historically, a task like carving a precise, smooth angle into a hillside that required an operator with a decade of accumulated physical seat-of-your-pants experience.
Right, a real craft.
A real craft. With the ICT excavator, the skill is literally embedded into the equipment. It uses GPS, sensors, and software. The operator defines the start and end points and the prescribed slope angle on a screen. The machine then goes into a semi-auto mode and it automatically adjusts the bucket's depth and angle. This allows an operator with maybe only a few weeks of training to perform tasks that were previously reserved for absolute experts.
So the technology is democratizing expertise, and it's extending the useful working life of the human driver, regardless of their age or experience. What about augmenting the physical body of the aging laborer?
That's where you see the private sector focusing on physical augmentation. The construction firm Obayashi partnered with a company called Seismic to develop something they call powered clothing.
Powered clothing.
Yes. These are enhanced garments that use unobtrusive robotics and sensors to augment the physical strength of aging manual laborers. When a worker bends over to lift a heavy object or performs a repeated physical task, the garment provides active power to their hips and lower back. It assists with sitting, standing, lifting, and carrying. It's a highly targeted solution designed specifically to maintain productivity and extend the working life of a workforce that is rapidly approaching retirement age.
This crisis is also forcing some interesting industry convergence, especially in agriculture, where the problem is arguably even more acute.
Oh, it's absolutely acute. With the average age of farmers approaching 70, huge amounts of agricultural land are just being abandoned. So industrial solutions are needed to bypass traditional labor-intensive thinking.
And Komatsu came in again here.
They did. Using industrial thinking, they targeted the most labor-intensive part of wet rice farming, which is transplanting seedlings. They realized that their ICT bulldozers, the ones designed for extreme precision in construction, could flatten rice paddies to an unprecedented degree.
Why does that matter?
because that perfectly flat, level surface allowed rice to be planted directly from seeds instead of seedlings, a technique that was previously very difficult because of water control issues. This cut costs by a massive 40% and made it easier to convert the fields for other uses. It's a purely industrial solution applied to an agricultural crisis, driven entirely by the labor void.
Let's move from the fields to the highways. The logistics and transportation sectors are struggling just as much with driver shortages.
And the solution there is critical for the national economy. Driver augmentation. We're seeing widespread testing of semi-automated truck convoys.
So one driver, multiple trucks.
Exactly. One human driver leads a platoon of 2 or 3 driverless trucks that are digitally tethered close behind, using advanced sensors and communication. This allows one person to efficiently manage the transport capacity of 3 or 4 trucks. It's a direct mitigation for the acute shortage of commercial truck drivers.
And for passengers, especially in these shrinking rural towns, the driverless bus isn't just a cool technology, it's a social necessity.
It's pure automation driven by necessity. Fully self-driving buses are being tested extensively, often along predetermined low-traffic routes in rural areas. Conventional bus routes are disappearing because there's simply no human drivers left to take the shifts. Deploying these systems ensures that the large, concentrated elderly populations in these regions maintain their mobility. It preserves their access to essential services and prevents a complete regional collapse.
And finally, we have to touch on elder care and health. This is probably the most sensitive area for this kind of technological intervention. What unique Japanese robotic solutions are emerging to face that massive cognitive impairment challenge?
Robotics are being applied across the entire spectrum, from social and emotional needs to critical health tasks. For emotional well-being, you have examples like Pero, the therapeutic robotic seal.
The little white seal, I've seen videos of it.
That's the one. It's used widely in elder care settings. It's fitted with sensors and AI that allow it to respond to touch and learn a patient's preferences. It helps with stress reduction and socialization, especially with dementia patients who often respond very well to non-threatening interactive stimuli. Then you have the Telenoid, which is a minimal, sort of uncanny, human-like android.
What's its purpose?
It's designed as a remote communication device to enhance connectivity between family members and their older relatives who might be suffering from severe cognitive impairment.
It really makes you wonder, if these technologies succeed in providing comfort and utility, are they accelerating a kind of comfortable decline? Or are they just masking a fundamental societal loneliness that they can't ever fully solve?
That is the ultimate tension. But they are certainly solving the immediate labor problem with industrial precision.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, a vending machine that was developed to address dysphagia, that's difficulty swallowing.
A major risk for the elderly?
A critical risk.
Yeah.
It often leads to aspiration pneumonia, and it requires liquids to be prepared very precisely. Traditionally, nursing home technicians would add thickening agents by hand, a task that requires a lot of care and time. Now, there are automated vending machines that can accurately add these thickening agents to coffee or tea. The user can select the exact viscosity level they need to prevent choking.
A technological fix for a critical public health and labor issue.
It's precisely where Japanese manufacturing excellence is deployed to meet a social need. This entire technological trajectory proves that their strategic refusal to use mass immigration forces a radical, technology-driven re-engineering of work and society. And it prioritizes order over the messiness of rapid social change.
We've spent a lot of time discussing this high-trust society, this exquisite piece built on the virtue of meiwaku, not causing trouble. This society relies on a highly mannered social mask, the tape-mei. But as all these external and internal pressures mount, we're seeing that mask start to fray, especially online.
Yes, online is where the raw, unsanctioned truth, the harm, is allowed to erupt. It's creating a kind of digital pressure valve.
A place for things that can't be said in person.
Exactly. The internet provides a level of anonymity that allows deep-seated hostility and insecurity, things that simply cannot be expressed in the highly ordered physical world, to surface. And we see a clear consensus among commentators that online xenophobia is rising, and anonymity is just amplifying it. It's challenging that very ideal of a homogeneous, ordered society.
What are the primary drivers of this online hostility? Is it always just a purely racial thing?
It's often more reactionary than that. A lot of it is driven by visible disruptions to that established order. There's been an exponential increase in foreign tourism, made much worse by the weak currency, which makes Japan very affordable right now.
So it's an issue of overcrowding.
It's that. And it's the highly visible instances of perceived bad behavior. Noise issues, disruption by social media influencers, looking for the perfect shot in inappropriate locations, crowding in previously quiet residential neighborhoods. There's this general feeling of a loss of order and local privacy.
And for a society that places such a high value on not inconveniencing others on Meiwaku, this influx of perceived disruption becomes a powerful, anonymous irritant.
A very powerful one. And it feeds directly into this deep-seated us versus them mentality that reinforces homogeneity.
Can you explain that a little more?
Well, Japan has historically sought its national identity in homogeneity. This leads to a very sharp, almost binary distinction between inside, which is Japanese, and outside, which is foreigners. When a foreigner acts badly, the action is often generalized immediately. You'll see comments like, foreigners are just like that. It reinforces a narrative of external threat.
But when a Japanese person acts out,
they're generally viewed as a regrettable outlier, an aberration. This cognitive dissonance, it preserves the sacred image that the in-group is fundamentally stable and ordered, and it makes it incredibly easy to project all of your social frustrations and anxieties onto the outside group, especially in the anonymous digital sphere.
What's particularly concerning, though, is that this doesn't seem to be limited to just online anger. The lack of legal and social scrutiny seems to allow this digital prejudice to bleed into and sustain real-world discrimination.
That is a critical observation about the resilience of this high-trust social order. Despite the rise in online toxicity, Japan's legal and social systems show a significant lack of incentive to address non-violent, real-world discrimination.
You still see Japanese-only signs.
You see the persistence of Japanese-only establishments. You see explicit job limitations set to Japanese-only, even in public employment services. The underlying issue is the social structure's perception of immigrants. They are primarily treated as exchangeable guests or as temporary laborers.
They're not expected to integrate.
They are not expected or, frankly, encouraged to integrate socially or to call Japan their permanent home. And this fundamental lack of a legal and social commitment to integration reinforces the temporary nature of their presence and, in a way, legitimizes these subtle forms of discrimination.
So, in a strange, stabilizing way, the online hostility actually serves a key function for the high-trust society. It acts as this necessary digital pressure valve.
It does.
It prevents the Hun from shattering the teipei in public.
It absolutely serves that function. The online sphere provides an outlet for very real anxieties. Economic stagnation, frustration over a perceived loss of global status, made so much worse by the weak yen, and a broader, simmering backlash against globalization and the influx of what are seen as uncontrollable foreign elements.
And since these frustrations can't be expressed overtly because of the need to maintain Taimei and Meiwaku,
the digital sphere becomes the place where people can project their anger. They preserve the ordered, highly mannered physical world, but at the cost of increasing digital prejudice. It ensures that the civilization fortress remains internally calm, even if its digital walls are under constant attack.
We've traced this incredible tension at the heart of modern Japan. The strategic refusal of two very different blunt instruments, nuclear force on one hand and mass immigration on the other, and the complex, nuanced solutions those refusals demand for survival.
Yes. The refusal to acquire nuclear weapons forces Japan to pursue this intense planning and dependence on a very complex security guarantee, defined as much by ballistic missile defense and conventional capabilities as it is by nuclear ones. And similarly, the strategic refusal to embrace mass immigration mandates a radical, technology-driven re-engineering of work and society.
A necessary form of industrial self-help.
That's what it is. It's a way to cope with demographic decline. Both of these responses are, in the end, high-stakes gambles. They're gambles on the resilience of a nation that consistently prefers a predictable, ordered existence, even if that existence entails a graceful decline, over picking up the violent instruments of the Western realist playbook or allowing uncontrolled social change to disrupt its unique architecture of peace. The commitment to maintaining this unique cultural and social order is, really, the defining strategy of modern Japan.